Hi folks, this is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report. Well, there's so much that we can talk about ice fishing because now that's a big sport in our area for this time of the year. But I think the most important thing that we can't ever talk about too much is safety. And I'm going to cover that today because I think it's so critical. And again, I often turn to my buddy on Black Lake, Jigger Jim, because he's an avid ice fisherman. But there's even more to the reason that I talked to Jim, because years ago, and it wasn't that many, maybe but it was several years ago. I remember the time that it happened, and Jim had always stressed to me every week on the radio how important safety is, the way you need to walk, the things that you need to look for, having a spud and using that as a sounding board and so forth. Well, he was moving from one hole that he had drilled to another. This was on Black Lake years ago, and all of a sudden he went under. And as Jim told me today, he said, Don, that day I really thought that was it. I didn't think I'd live. I had almost accepted the point where I was going to die. And so what can I pass on to people to make a difference that if that happens to them? Because, and I know all of us, no matter whether we're driving a car, fishing, whatever we're doing, we always think that the worst is going to happen to someone else. It's not going to happen to us, but it can happen to us. And he said the number one thing he would recommend is that you have, because everybody today has a cell phone, have your cell phone in a waterproof bag. He says, I know it becomes a pain because you'll get calls if you're out there fishing, and do you answer the phone? You got to go through getting it out of the plastic bag and so forth. But let's say you go fishing and you stop doing all your phoning, but you have that phone in a disposable bag in a part of you where you can get to if you go under the water. Jim had his cell phone that day, but it was in his pocket. And once he went into that water, the phone was no good. He says if I'd had the phone, I would have had a much greater chance of being safe because I could have contacted people instead of waiting for somebody to see me. So just common sense things are so important for safety. Let people know where you're going to be. The safest thing of all is when you're ice fishing to always be fishing with a buddy. So if one of you goes in, the other can help try to save you. If you're all alone, your chances are so much slimmer. The other thing is to understand what makes ice safe. And honestly, we can never be certain. We can say, well, it should be at least 3 inches. And I've read in another book where it should be 4 inches. But ice in one place can be different than ice in another place. And also now as I'm speaking to you, there's snow all over all the ice. So we no longer can look at the ice because strong ice has a different color than weak ice. When the color of the ice becomes discolored or milky or something like that, then it's not as strong as clear ice. But now there's the weight of the snow on top of it, plus you can't see the ice. So it really becomes more important to understand what can make ice safer or less safe. Number one, if there's currents, if there's any movement of water under the ice, that can influence whether it is made a strong bond or not. Things like even schools of carp that are moving under the ice can cause that water to circulate and it won't be as strong. Dying vegetation can delay the formation of really strong ice. And the other thing that we all should remember is that the ice along the shoreline is always going to be weaker. Number one, because it's more susceptible to sunlight going down and making that ice less strong. And also currents change. As water levels in any body of water go up and down, that ice along the shoreline is going to be the most susceptible to changing. So it's very important when you first step out onto the ice. That could be the most dangerous part of all. And here's the other very basic tip. If you have a spud, and spud is how people used to make holes in the ice, but a spud use that as sort of a walking stick, like the blind would have to reach forward and test the ice. You can, and especially if that ice doesn't have snow on it, but as you tap the ice in front of you, you can tell by the sound of whether that ice is strong or not. So employing some of these things, there's so many other things to safety, knowing that the area that you're fishing, whether there are currents, and I keep talking about currents, but springs entering the water can make that area that the ice covers less stable than others. There's so many factors, but remember one thing: we can never be too safe. If we really want to enjoy the sport, I know people that have been doing it forever feel, well, we know, we have the answers, we know what we're doing. But those same people every year, some of those same people go through the ice. So be as careful as you can and enjoy absolutely fantastic winter sport. Until next time, folks, this is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report.